Well, thank you so much for that.
If everybody could go ahead and mute their mics as well, and then we'll let Agapios take it away.
Thanks a lot for that introduction, and thank you for having me. So my name is Agapios Ilia, and I'm coming to you from Cyprus, which is in the eastern corner of the Mediterranean Sea. Small island, and we have pretty much ideal conditions for all kinds of astronomy. There's nice dark skies out here. The climate is superb, and as you can tell, I'm pretty thankful and excited for living here and having the chance to do what I love. My main focus is the planets, high resolution imaging of the planets. And I started I started experimenting with a simple pocket camera in about 2005, 2006. I took my first shots of Mars and the moon. And ever since then, I've been on a journey of trying to make the most out of the equipment that I have. If you go online and you look up planetary images, you often get results from guys who have, massive telescopes or live in exotic locations. I mean, yeah, this is an island, but it's not a tropical island or something. It's just the seeing here is pretty much regular. So I've been on this journey of trying to optimize both my equipment as well as my method, the way that I approach imaging. And over the years, I've settled into a methodology that I follow religiously, and I highly recommend that you do the same if you have, the same kind of interest of making the most out of your telescope and getting the best images that you can get. So as you can see, I'm outside with my telescope. Sorry. So this is my main instrument. It's a 9.25-inch Schmidt Cassegrain Celestron. It's on an equatorial mount, and I have all kinds of attachments on it. There's a motorized Crayford focuser. I have a USB hub with all of the connections for a filter wheel. There's the atmospheric dispersion corrector, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a bit, and the camera, of course. So when I started, back then, everybody was using an old webcam, a Philips 2U cam. I don't know if anybody remembers that. So that little camera could do about 10 frames per second. Now, any modern, even a beginner's planetary camera can do, I don't know, anywhere 120, 200, 300 frames per second. I mean, this is the ASI 224. This one can do north of 500 frames per second if you have a relatively bright target. So when you've started imaging with 10 frames per second, going up to 300 and 400 frames per second, that's just unbelievable, the amount of data that you can gather and the amount of processing that you can do to that data to make the most of it and get the highest resolution possible. But all of that really doesn't matter if the number one factor when it comes to high resolution planetary imaging is not in your favor, and that is the atmosphere, the seeing. And understanding your local conditions is paramount to what you can get out of your telescope. At the beginning, I remember I was going out night after night, and I had a notepad with me, and I would write down, the night's forecast and what I was expecting to get and what I was getting eventually out of the telescope, trying to understand how seeing affected what I was doing. And I came to some conclusions when it comes to the atmosphere, to the seeing. First of all, if you've ever read in forums and stuff like that. People recommending that you go out when it's really humid. That's absolutely true. Um, the best nights I've ever had, humidity was off the wall. That's when you hear in your forecast that there's low cloud or humidity expected. That's usually the best night you can go out and use your telescope to observe and image the planets. Because when that happens, what's happening is, if you think of the atmosphere as a fluid body separated into layers, um, when you have humidity, what's happening is the wind all across those layers is coming from the same direction and at relatively low speed. That's why you get humidity. That's one of the reasons why humidity forms. So when that's happening, that's when you get the really steady conditions, so you can get the most out of the images. Um, uh, Other than the seeing, there's some technical things that you need to have in mind. Collimation. Your telescope will not perform if it's not absolutely perfectly collimated. And a lot of people, sadly, are either too apprehensive of trying to collimate, or they just think that because they did it maybe once a few years ago, it's still okay, no matter how many trips you've taken with your telescope. I collimate my telescope every night, every time I'm going to use it. And this is an instrument that's permanently set up. I don't take it down. It's always set up, and it's on a dolly type mount, and I roll it about 12 feet in a shed. It doesn't go anywhere, but I still collimate every time, and it always needs to be collimated. There's always a little bit of shift happening in the secondary mirror. So mastering collimation again is absolutely paramount. There's all kinds of tools that you can use. There's all kinds of methods. I mean, take your pick. But my absolute favorite is MetaGuide, which is a free software that you can download and have on your computer. Um, I can show you a simulation of MetaGuide. Let me just share my screen. So MetaGuide is a free software. You can see it here. That allows you to use a video camera to take a high resolution view of a star. And basically what it does is you input your telescope details in it, your aperture, your focal ratio, your magnification factor, your pixel size, and almost like the way PhD works, it knows what to expect from your telescope. It knows what your telescope can resolve. So you're examining the view of a star, and if that star is elongated, as it would be if you're miscollimated, then MetaGuide will give you directions to how to move the star by using your secondary mirror screws to achieve perfect collimation. And I have a simulation here. I hope you can see. You see that bouncing dot over there?
Yep, we see it.
So that is a simulation of the view you're going to get through MetaGuide. The green circle is your star, and that dot is basically the direction of the elongation in real time. So if you notice the bouncing red dot, you'll see that there's a preference towards one specific direction. It looks like it's random, but it's actually preferring one specific direction. That's where you want to move the star using the screws to fine tune your collimation. And it looks difficult and daunting, but nowadays it takes me about, I don't know, less than 10 minutes to achieve perfect collimation with this software. I highly, highly recommend it. It's freeware, and I've been using this for 10 years now, and I wouldn't be without it. So highly recommended. Once you've achieved your collimation, you're then able to use pretty much any software you prefer for capturing images. The tool of choice today would be fire capture. Um, I know a lot of guys who still use, other software like, I don't know, SharpCap or IC Capture or whatever. I've used them all, and I think fire capture is probably the best. It has everything you would need. It's really suited towards high resolution planetary imaging. I have it running here. You can see Mars. Um, and I can just go through fire capture and give you my overview of the software. So on the left side here, we have the controls for the camera. We can choose the frame size. We can switch to the maximum frame size for this camera. We can use region of interest, which is a very, very powerful tool that we have, which basically what it does is, I mean, if you see the frame here, Mars takes up a tiny part of this 1300 by 970 pixel frame, right? I mean, it's only what, 20 arc seconds across in the center of the frame. So when this camera is using the full extent of the sensor, it can only do up to about 100 frames per second. When you use region of interest, you exponentially increase that speed because you're ignoring all of this black space, which you don't need. So I can just click and drag a small part of the sensor here. And if I let go, the camera, the software is only reading that small part of the sensor. And you can see now that with this configuration, I can do 150 frames per second. Before, at maximum, I could only do 60. So let's just go back to that. So that's one of the really good tools that come with fire capture. You can adjust your gain, you can adjust your exposure, you can use preset controls for the planets or whatever else you want to image. And you can use profiles. And this can be really helpful. I mean, here we have a profile for Mars, which you can set your preferences to the way you want to image, and you can save that to that profile. You can use individual settings for filters. I mean, I'm using a color camera here, but I actually have a filter wheel attached. And if I switch to a different filter, the settings will change depending on my preferences. And it can save all of that to make your life easier. You can see here the frame rate that's coming from the camera. What's the maximum capable? What's the actual frame rate that we're getting if we're losing any frames? I know I talk a lot about FPS and frame rates, and that's really, really important. I like to configure my equipment so that I'm getting the highest frame rate possible. And the reason for that is the seeing is never steady and consistent across a long period of time. Even when you look at the predictions and you see that you have good seeing expected, that doesn't mean that the seeing will be of the same quality for the whole night. It's always shifting, it's always changing. And, when you have a fast camera, if you can get in a split second, if you can get a really large number of frames, that's when you can be very strict when you go into your stacking software to select the best of those frames. So if you have a really fast camera, let's say I choose to stack 10% of my frames. If I have a really fast camera, that 10% will amount to a good number of frames. If I have a slow camera, or if I'm imaging at a slow frame rate, then that 10% will be less frames. So I personally like to image as fast as I can. I mean, the seeing is never really exceptional enough to, have the luxury of not imaging as fast as I can. So I've kind of settled at doing that, and I think it's been successful so far. Um, so going back to fire capture, um, another really helpful tool that we have is the auto run feature. Let me see if I can pull this up over here. So with this feature, you can set fire capture to do a consecutive string of captures. And you can set the limitation that you want, how many frames or how many seconds you want that to be. You can, account for delay between the captures. This usually helps if you have an older computer and it's kind of struggling to pull in the frames. If you allow for some delay, you're giving your computer time to finish downloading the frames before you start another capture. So I usually do runs of 20. So if I click start now, the software is going to start capturing 60-second files with 2-second delay, and it's going to do 20 of those. I also have the mount connected to fire capture. So the software can auto guide in a way. It's basically nudging the planet to keep it in the center, so I don't have to worry about having the planet trailing off. So I just set everything, set the parameters, select the auto run, have it do a 20 capture set, click the auto guide, and then it's hands off from there, assuming that you've done everything else before. You've collimated, you've focused the telescope, and you've set the ADC as well. So that's pretty much it about fire capture. I can go into a lot more details, but I don't know if you guys want to spend the time on fire capture, or if you want to talk about the atmospheric dispersion corrector.
I'll just say one thing about fire capture. I had a question
Yep.
about it a few weeks ago, so I sent an email to Torsten Edelman. He answered me within 2 hours.
Yeah.
He's a really good guy.
Yeah, he is. I can't believe that this software is free. I mean, there's so many things you can do. If you're really into planetary astrophotography, I can't imagine using anything else. There's just so many tools in it, and it it makes your life easy.
Agapius,
Yeah.
talk about some good settings of gain, because I always struggle of setting my gain with respect to planets,
Okay.
and then try to balance out with exposure and gain. So what do you do? Do you crank up the gain high to get more frames, or
So okay, so that's a good question. So there's two schools of thought. Some people like to use the unity gain setting, because that's when the camera sort of performs the best. I like, as I said before, I like to shoot with the fastest frame rate possible, and that usually means using a higher gain. But I'm only doing that because I know that I'm going to end up with a lot of frames, and I'm not going to shoot one video. I'm going to shoot many videos. So in the end, my signal to noise ratio will be high. I don't know if there's a specific setting that you should use, but I can tell you what you shouldn't do. and that is not to use a low gain setting. That's usually associated with all kinds of artifacts, especially in Jupiter and Mars. So if I can tell you something, that will be don't use too low gain. Um, I like to balance my histogram um, roughly around the 50% mark. You can see here on Mars, we're now shooting in color, and you can see how the red channel is spiking up to almost 70. You can't see that if I turn off debayer. But what I like to do is keep it around the 50% mark and balance the exposure um, with the gain, but using sort of, if possible, using a lower gain setting, but not too low. I don't know if I'm making sense. You don't want to be too low in gain. You're going to get all kinds of artifacts. But if you're going to use high, make sure that you're getting a lot of frames so that you can account for all the noise that's coming in each individual frame. If you end up with a large data pool, then you can then cancel out the noise. So
You focus. How do you find getting focus?
okay, so focus is really quite different than deep sky astrophotography, where you can just use a Bakhtinov mask or something and set your focus and forget about it. That's not how it works. With the planets, I find myself adjusting focus every about 20-30 minutes. It's a dynamic process. I do have a really good motorized focuser, but with fire capture, you can achieve really good focus just by using your hands. And I'm going to demonstrate that now. Fire capture has this auto align tool. Um, when you're imaging planets, you get a little bit of a bounce. You can see Mars is wobbling and bouncing around. If I click on auto align, what fire capture is doing now is it's taking the frames as they're coming in, and it's aligning them precisely. So Mars is now still on the screen. If I nudge the telescope, you see that it stays there. So I can touch my focus knob, and you're going to feel like you have the world's best focuser, because the target is centered in the screen and you can use your hands to actually get quite a good focus. That's usually how I do it. I focus like this, and then I switch to my motorized focuser to follow up for temperature and do fine adjustments. But even if you don't have a motorized focuser, if you use this tool, you're going to achieve really good focus.
So you wouldn't focus on a star first and
No.
then go to the planet.
No, there's no need for that.
What about if you're seeing is really poor and it's so smudgy you can't tell if you're in good focus or not?
Well, then you can watch TV.
There is a focus tool within fire capture, which I've used. It's a little different from other ways, but it seems to work.
Yeah, well, as I said, you can play around and settle in to a method that works best for you. I find that I don't really need anything other than the auto align tool, manual focusing, and then just following up with my my digital focuser. When you've done this again and again and again, it's going to become a procedure that you stick to. And when I'm out at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning, I don't want to be experimenting with things. I want to, use things that I know work. And these tools work really well.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
So you're just doing the focus by visual then? Is there is there a tab somewhere in here that gives you a metric of quality or something?
There is. I haven't used it, as I said, because with the auto align tool, when you're even a little bit out of focus, it's really noticeable. So you could say that I just focus by eye using this tool, and then I just follow up micro adjusting through through the controls of my digital focuser. But no, I don't use something that gives a feedback on the screen as you would for deep sky imaging, for example.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So once you've set your telescope, you've done your collimation, you've found your target, you've captured some data, you then have to go and do your processing. And the tool of choice today for processing is AutoStacker. Before AutoStacker, we had Registax. I don't know how many of you have used Registax back in the day. It did its job really well, but it became unbearably slow at some point. AutoStacker is lightning fast compared to Registax, and it also has some tools that make your job that much easier. So let me just close this and pull up AutoStacker. And let's just do some videos that I got before. So this is what I got today. Let me just pull up a random video. So this is a 400 by 400 recording of Mars. And what I can do here is, because all of this black space is unnecessary, I can trim it down, and this will speed up, it will speed up the stacking process with AutoStacker. I can play my video here and get an idea of the conditions. I can stop when I think I have a good frame. I can scroll through frames and find one that looks sharp. Let's go with this one. And you can either click on different parts to set your alignment points, or you can have it do it on its own automatically. I'm not going to say that there's a distinct difference between going with the automatic way or setting them yourself, but you can experiment and see what it does for you. What I like to do is, because I shoot long strings of data, I shoot consecutive files using the auto run feature. I may end up with 100 or 120 consecutive minute-long files. I like to open all of those up in AutoStacker and use the automatic alignment placement option and have it go through all of those videos, stack them with the same percentage, and then go into the resulting folder and try to isolate periods of better seeing. And I'm going to show you that now. I'm going to set the alignment points, and I'm going to have it analyze this video. And at this point, what the software is doing is it's looking through all of those frames that you have. 1 minute long file at 300 FPS can result in many thousands of frames. And those frames will be random in terms of quality. If you imagine that each frame is, I think of it as a deck of cards, but using only the numbers. So frame number 1 may have quality 7, frame number 2 may have quality 3, frame number 4 may have quality 5. There's that randomness going on. So what this software will do is it will take all of those frames and sort them with the best ones at the beginning, and the worst ones at the back. So you can then go and choose how much of that video you want to keep and how strict you want to be with frame selection. And again, going back to the initial point of having a fast camera or shooting at high FPS, you can be really strict if you have a lot of data. So if you can see here, can you see
Agapios,
yeah.
If I could just ask you a question.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Because of the frame stabilization, you feel you don't need to use pip, right? Because in the past you'd use pip if your planet's wandering all over the place in order to
correct.
effectively stitch all those files together.
You don't need to do that. Yeah, you don't need to do that
Yeah.
anymore because AutoStacker basically, as soon as you open a video, it's already aligned all of those frames. Before in Registax, you had to do one run through the whole video to align the frames, another run to optimize the frames, another run to go through the alignment points, and another run to stack. But AutoStacker has, it skips a lot of that. It does a lot of that before you go into it, so you don't need to do that anymore. So once you've analyzed one of the files, you get this graph over here, and understanding this graph is really paramount. I don't know if you guys can see it well. Can you see the graph here? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
okay. So the graph is made up of three things. You have the grid in the back, the purple grid. You have the wavy pattern in the middle, and you have the green curve in the top. So, so the grid in the back, if you go from left to right, you have frame number 1 and the last frame at the end. If you go from bottom to top, you have quality. So the bottom is low quality, the top is high quality. The wavy pattern is AutoStacker's assessment of the quality of your frames as you recorded them. That's why it's random. So frame number 1 may be touching the bottom, frame number 2 may be picking up at the top. That's because it's random. And it's showing you what it found in your video. So the trend is also an indicator of your overall seeing conditions. So the trend here is pretty much somewhere in the middle. So the seeing wasn't exponentially good and it wasn't terrible. It was somewhere in the middle. So after it's analyzed it, it's coming back with this green curve. So the green curve is the frames after they were sorted. So the good frames are concentrated at the beginning and the bad frames are all the way in the back. So if I clear this now, you can see that my scroll button is at the beginning. So this is the best frame. And somewhere here, we have an average frame. And all the way here, this is a bad frame. See that? So now AutoStacker has sort of tidied up all those random frames into something we can work with. So after we've done that, we can choose either a number of frames we want to stack or a percentage. And AutoStacker can do multiple passes. So it can give you 3, 4 different stacks. So as I said before, I like to be somewhat strict. So I'm only gonna stack a small percentage of my video. In this case, let's just try 15%. And when I click stack, AutoStacker is now going to stack 15% of all of those frames and come back with a frame that we can sharpen. So this is just one video. If you have a consecutive string of videos, you can open all of them together in AutoStacker and have the software do the same thing to all of those videos.
Yeah, just to interject, so
Yeah.
for people here that have not used Firecapture before, when you choose 15%, then it stacks them. It means it's stacking the best 15%
Yeah.
and ignoring the other 85%.
Yes, that's what it's doing. After the analyze process, now your video is sorted. So when you ask for 10% or 15% or 50%, it's going from the best to the worst. So 15% would be the best frames down to about 75% of the overall quality. So yeah, 15% is the best 15% of your whole frames. So now that we've stacked, we can go into Registacks and work with wavelets for sharpening. That's still probably the best way to sharpen. I know a lot of people use other software. I can't say that I've tried, but I don't see why Registacks works really well when it comes to sharpening. So let's just go and get that frame. So this is the stack that we got, the 15% stack. And we're using wavelets, and think of wavelets like brushes. So you have wavelets 1 to 6, and that would be 1 is, the finer brush, and 6 would be the coarse brush to sort of wipe out fuzziness from your image and get sharpness. So you can play around with all of these settings and see what you like. I've settled to using dyadic wavelets, and I usually go for, depending on the night, but I usually go for wavelets 1 to 3 in reverse. So I start with 3, which is the coarser, and I give it a little nudge, see what's there. This is the most satisfying part of processing this stage. So go to 2, give it a little nudge, and then end up with 1. And at this stage, you want to be careful. You don't want to get too excited and push the wavelets too much, because then you're going to end up with something that looks how do I put this nicely? Overcooked. Unnatural, exactly. I get a lot of images in my feeds, and I see a lot of images everywhere posted and stuff like that. And a lot of people, overdo it when it comes to sharpening. And you want to be careful. I like to do whatever I can to preserve, a natural looking image. So as I said, I like to use wavelets 3 to 1, and progressively going deeper. And you can see how that clears up the fuzziness nicely, and you get a nice sharp view. And the good thing with Registacks is you can save these settings into a scheme. You can save the adjustments that you do into a scheme, and you can apply that scheme to all of those files that you got. And that's what I do. I adjust my wavelets for the night, and settle on something that looks good, and I save that scheme and I apply that scheme to all of those files that I got. Another thing that I see a lot of people doing, and I don't really agree, is you end up, you find the scheme, you settle on something, and you save it, and you use that again and again and again. I think you should save a scheme for that particular target for that particular night, because the scene changes so much and it's never the same. So I highly recommend that you look into using the schemes. And if you follow my method and capture a large collection of consecutive files, this is a lifesaver because you are processing all of those files with exactly the same way, and you're going to end up with, I can show you here, you're going to end up with a folder with a lot of processed images that are processed exactly the same way. So let me just show you here. So these here are processed stacks that were processed with registacks using the schemes. So they're identical when it comes to the amount of sharpening they got. So I can flip through them, and the only thing that's changing between them when I flip through them is the scene, because the settings are the same, the orientation is the same, the processing is the same. So if there's a difference between them, that difference is the atmosphere. So when you capture a long duration of time, consecutive files, and you process them identically, that's when you're going to notice that the atmosphere is never consistent. Not even, a minute between frames, you're still going to get difference. I have a very illustrative frame here that I can show you. So these are 2 frames of Jupiter that are just 1 minute apart, and the difference between them is staggering. If you're sitting there outside in the cold and you don't have a method, and you're just sitting there and you're waiting for when you think the scene looks better to click record, I think you're wasting your time. I like to image for as long as I can go before my hard drive fills up, usually about 2 hours, close to when the planet is at its highest in the sky. And that gives me 80, 100, 120 files. And when I go back and I process them and I go through them one by one, it's always amazing to me to see those 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes of better conditions. And I get those frames and I keep those, and I use WinJupos to derotate those frames together and come up with a final image. So I don't want to. Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
Can I ask you one question? So when you stack an auto stacker, do you ever use the auto stacker sharpening routine, or do you just bring in the raw file that it stacks?
No, I like to process in registacks for sharpening, so I don't use that.
And so you wouldn't. Have you tried PixInsight and some of the sharpening tools in PixInsight?
No, not really. You can play around and see what works for you. I've tried deconvolution with another software. I can't remember what it's called, but when you get good seeing with a collimated telescope, you'll find that you don't need to do a lot to the data. If you find yourself needing to do a lot to the data, then that means either your conditions weren't the best, your collimation was off, or there was something else going on. When you see the planets with a perfectly collimated telescope under good conditions, that's something that you don't forget easily. And you'll find that when you have good data, you don't really need to sharpen them too much.
I don't know if you mentioned this earlier. I don't think I heard. Are you using a Barlow with that, or are you shooting at native f10?
I am using a Barlow. I have a really old Celestron Ultima ×2 Barlow, and it's hidden somewhere inside my optical train here. I've used, all kinds of Barlows, Televiews, and PowerMates, and everything. I find that this little old Barlow works just as well as any other, and I don't think I'm going to change it anytime soon. It's actually a pretty good find. You can find one used for about $50 or something, and it works beautifully. An apochromatic Barlow. It's a little bit more than a ×2. I think it's a 2.25, but I've been using it for years, and I don't think I'm going to replace it anytime soon. Absolutely, you have to use a Barlow lens when you're doing this kind of imaging, because you want to get the right sampling for your camera and telescope configuration. And with these kinds of cameras, that's usually around 5 times the pixel size, give or take. It's not strict. You can play around. I usually image at f22, f23, somewhere there with this system, and it's been giving me good images at that configuration. So to move on, I don't know if you guys want to, I can talk about the ADC, or if you have any questions.
Yeah, Gapius, I guess in extension to what Alfredo asked, do you use the drizzle in auto stacker?
No.
Or no? Okay.
No. I've experimented with it, but I don't really use it. If I want to enlarge my images, I usually resize at the last stage of my processing in Photoshop. But I don't really use the drizzle function.
Okay. Okay.
Agapios, I think there's you may have answered this. There's a question from JC. Can you explain what the Barlow does for the effort, and is there a point the Barlow is too much?
Sorry, can you say that again? Can you say that again, please?
Okay. JC asked, can you explain what the Barlow does for the effort, and is there a point that the Barlow is too much?
Yeah. So a Barlow lens will ensure that your sensor is getting the proper resolution coming from your telescope. And that's something you have to match depending on the telescope that you're using. Now, the common practice is to find an optical configuration that's giving you somewhere around 5 times the pixel size of your camera, which means what? If the pixel size of your camera, in this case, it's a 3.75 micron pixel. So if I use a Barlow configuration that will take me up to roughly f18, f19, somewhere there, 3.75 times 5, that's when, in theory, I have the best resolution coming into my system. But that is not strict. You can play around with that. That is assuming you have the best seeing. You can be a bit higher than that, but not too much, because then if let's say for a telescope like this, you want to shoot at about f22, f23. If I use a Barlow configuration that will push me up to, say, f30, f35, what's happening then is a lot of the information will be spread out to more pixels. So you're actually losing resolving power. You're just getting a larger image scale, but without gaining anything when it comes to resolution. So the common practice is to be around 5 times your pixel size. but you can play around with that. It's always depending on your seeing and your collimation.
Is there any time when you decide not to use a Barlow, or you always use a Barlow?
No, I always use the Barlow. Always. It's buried in there. So so yeah, it's always there.
Okay.
It's analogous to if you're doing visual observing. If you use an eyepiece, which is if you magnify what you're looking at when you're looking visually too much, it becomes fuzzy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of analogous to that.
It's like the old pocket cameras. You had optical zoom and digital zoom. So you go to a point where you're just magnifying the image without getting more details. It's just a bigger scale. Yeah. So if you guys don't have any more questions, I can. I don't know how much time we have. Did we push through?
I guess you could talk about the adaptive part. I think that's what Samir had asked about. That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just take this out. So the atmospheric dispersion corrector is a must-have tool for both visual observing as well as imaging. So I'm going to try and show you this here. I don't know how well you can see it. So it's this part right here. This part right here. So it's a little gizmo that looks like a Barlow lens, and it has a couple of levers sticking out to the side. And what it does is it cancels out the distortion seen in really bright objects when they're low in the sky. So when you're observing the planets, not Mars, but especially Saturn and Jupiter, now that they're really low, you'll notice that you get that color distortion coming out that's most evident on the periphery of the planet, but it's actually present throughout. So a dispersion corrector basically cancels that out, and it's probably the most important accessory for high resolution viewing and imaging. It's inexpensive and it works wonderfully. I've been using it for 5 years now, and I cannot imagine myself imaging without it. It does such a great job at canceling out the dispersion that it's indispensable. I highly, highly recommend, even if you're not doing imaging, if you're just doing visual, I highly recommend you have one of these because the difference is unbelievable. I have yeah.
I'm sorry, before you go, somehow my screen was showing your picture of a galaxy, not the actual device. Any chance I could talk you into showing that device again?
Yep.
Oh yeah, Agapios, maybe stop sharing your screen for a second, and then your image will fill the screen.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah. And if you want to see him bigger, just go on speaker view and go fill the screen.
Okay. So.
Okay.
So the dispersion. Okay. So ignore everything else. The dispersion corrector is this part here, and I have it threaded. I have it threaded on a small rotator that allows me to rotate the camera. For framing purposes, I can rotate the camera independent of everything else. This is a small filter wheel, and the dispersion corrector is this part here. Okay. And so I don't know how well you can see that. But,
I can see it.
Okay, so you see these levers?
Yeah.
So these control prisms that are inside this corrector, and the goal is to set these prisms at a specific angle relative to your local horizon. So what you do is there's a 0 point, which is there, and you put it in your telescope, in such a way as to have these levers parallel to the horizon. And when this is in your telescope, you can then spread these levers equidistantly from the center point, which is here. And what it does is it cancels out the distortion of the atmosphere, and it really works wonders. It's a bit tricky to get your head around how it works, but once you do, you'll find yourself not wanting to be without it. I have.
How long does it take you every night to sort of adjust those little levers, would you say?
Here's where fire capture comes back into play, because it has a really cool adjustment tool that you can use, and that will help you set the dispersion corrector really accurately. It takes me about 10 minutes to, go through focus, framing, and setting of the dispersion corrector. And I recheck every about 20-25 minutes, because as the angle of the telescope changes, so does the amount of correction coming from the device. So you have to keep up. It's the only thing that hasn't been automated just yet. They've automated focusing, they've automated rotating, everything else. A dispersion corrector is the only thing that's yet to be automated. As soon as that's done, I'd be able to image from my couch without having to get up and touch anything on the telescope. That would be fantastic. So again, it's a tiny device. Looks like a small Barlow lens, with the exception of those two knobs sticking out the side, and it's indispensable for both visual and imaging. I got this 5 years ago, and I was so impressed by the results I was seeing from other observers. So as soon as I tried it on, I think it was Mars, I was so impressed at the difference, and it's really obvious when you're starting out and this is not set. As soon as you start spreading those levers, the difference is incredible. And when you're at the right correction point, the sharpness and the clarity of the view jumps up. It really jumps out at you. It's really noticeable. So I highly recommend that. So what should we?
Do you want to show the slide deck for the ADC?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So let me just share. Okay. So here's how it works. So this is what it looks like. And this is just an illustrative example of the difference that you can expect. This is Mars without the dispersion corrector, and this is after proper correction. Here's the prisms and how they work. These prisms are pyramid shaped, and they're offset to one another. And by sliding those levers, those prisms change orientation with regards to one another and the telescope. And that's how the dispersion cancels out. So when you're...
That's why it's so hard to focus when you don't have a dispersion corrector, right? Because it looks smudgy.
Yeah, it really helps. It's, I don't want to repeat myself, but it's really impressive when you put one of these in your imaging train and you adjust it properly, the before and after you is incredible, and not just at the fringing at the sides of the planets, but the overall view. And these work on axis only, so they only correct a tiny part of the axis, of the optical axis. So you couldn't use them for one of the questions that I get all the time is if you can use this for deep sky imaging as well. You can't, because when you go off axis, the view is terrible. There's all kinds of aberrations coming from this, but on axis it's perfect. You could, if you only wanted to image, a tiny planetary nebula. I think I haven't tried, but for planets on axis, it's fantastic. So so this is how it works. Those levers run in these channels, and the channels have a point where they go together, so they have a common path somewhere. So this lever would go from here to here and out to there, and this would go from here to there. So there's a point where you have a joint path for both the levers. So what you want to do is you want to find the central point of the common path, and you can see that in that illustration at the bottom left. When you find the common path of those levers and you find the central point, that's the zero correction point. That's the let's say where you begin. So you line up both those levers like so. You line them up, you put the whole thing in your telescope, and you rotate it so that those levers are lined up to the horizon. When you've done that, there's an adjustable bubble level that you can set to show you where you're leveled. And from that point, you can start spreading those levers to gain correction. And as you spread the levers, you see how the view gets sharper and sharper, and the distortion is sort of disappears. And you can spread depending on how high your target is and how exactly you have your optical system configured. And the key is to spread the levers at equal distances from the central point. So you don't just go around spreading the levers randomly. You have to be equidistantly from the central point. And once you found the proper correcting position for the levers, you have a bit of time before you need to readjust them. Because if you think of an equatorially mounted telescope, what's happening as the telescope is tracking the planet is the angle of the telescope relative to the horizon changes over time. So once you've set this, you have some time before dispersion starts to creep back in to the system. So after some time has passed, what you can do is, this is what I'm showing here. So the whole thing has tilted after some time. So what you can do is you can leave the body of the dispersion corrector undisturbed, and you can just get the levers and adjust the levers again at equal distances to come back to the proper correction point. I know it looks sort of daunting and complex, but it's actually fairly simple. All you have to do is you have to find your horizon, spread the levers at equal distances, and when you're looking through, even if you only want to do visual, if you're only looking at the target, and you just start spreading those levers and playing with the whole orientation, you'll you very easily find the proper correction point because the difference is so staggering. I highly recommend that you look into using an ADC for your system, and it's it's fairly inexpensive. I mean, it costs about as much as a typical ×2 Barlow lens. So why not have one of these? I've been using mine for 5 years now, and it's not going to go anywhere.
Question.
Yeah.
So now that whole imaging train with the filter wheel, then that goes into the Barlow? And
Yeah.
then into-
So good question. So there's a specific place for the ADC in your optical train, and that is between the camera and the Barlow lens. So on my optical train, which you can see here, we have the camera, the ADC, the Barlow lens, which is in here, and then a filter wheel. So the ADC has to be between the camera and the Barlow lens. And if you're not using a telecentric Barlow like a PowerMate, you're going to find that the use of the ADC pushes your focal length out by a lot. So what I've done here is I've sort of found a way to use the optical element of my Barlow lens and have it sit closer to the atmospheric dispersion corrector so that I would lose some of that distance and lose some of that additional focal length because it was pushing me up to f34, f36, something like that. But if you're using a telecentric Barlow like a PowerMate, you don't need to worry about that.
Thank you.
Agapius, so you using the filter wheel. What do you have in there? Because isn't this only work with a color camera?
Yeah, good question. So I use a other than the infrared block filter that I have for the color camera, I'm also using a 610 nanometer red filter, which helps a lot when it comes to collimation. And I'm also using a couple of other filters for Venus and stuff like that. When I'm using the filters, I'm not using the ADC. In other words, I'm only using the ADC when I'm doing color imaging. So I have things configured in such a way so that I don't have to, take things out and adjust things and put things back in. So when I'm not using, when I'm not doing RGB, I have the ADC at its original position, so that it's not doing anything to the optical train. But again, I'm only imaging on axis. If I was to do color lunar imaging, let's say, I would take out the atmospheric dispersion corrector because it only works for a small part of the center of the axis. So yeah.
Also, can you show us the section on far capture that helps tune the
Yep.
ADC?
Yes, we can do that. So let me just bring up fire capture again. So I'm going to reconnect the camera. Okay, so let's put this back in. See if we still have Mars. So there's a tool in fire capture that really helps with setting the dispersion corrector, and it's called the ADC tool. And what it does, okay, so this doesn't want to work. Anyway, so what it does is it's showing you, hang on, sorry guys. Let's see if we can get this to work. Okay, so what it does is it's showing you these circles overlaid. So you get a blue circle, a red circle, and a white circle. So when you have your target in the center of your frame, and you click on the ADC adjustment tool, which is this one, you're going to get this view of these three circles. And the purpose is to adjust your ADC to spread the levers until you get these circles as better overlaid on top of one another as you can. Let me see if I can get this view looking a bit better. So there's actually three circles on top of one another behind this, blue, red, and white, and the whole thing moves around. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're using your full frame and set your target in the center of the screen. But you can use the reticle feature here to help you find the actual center of your frame. Have your planet in the center, and when you click on the ADC adjustment tool and get this view, you start spreading the levers and you'll see the red and blue circles coming closer to one another. But what's also going to happen is the planet will move out of the center as you're adjusting. So what you do is you adjust a little bit, then you reposition the planet back in the center, gauge what's happened, and then adjust again and move again. And so you play with this until you have the planet in the center and the circles overlaid on top of one another as best as you can. And when you do that and you click out, you turn this off, the view is so much more sharp than before. So this takes me about, I don't know, 10 minutes tops.
So when you say the three circles are superimposed on each other, that was the little white circle that we saw in the upper left-hand corner?
Yeah.
That's where the super. So if you see one sticking out, then you know you've got it wrong or something like that?
Yeah. So in this example, you have red and blue.
Yeah.
So when you adjust, they move closer or further.
Got it.
Depending on what you do.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's really helpful, especially when it's 4 in the morning or something.
Did you use the auto guider to help you keep it centered?
Yeah, when after you've done all of this and you're gonna start imaging, yeah, auto guiding really helps because you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to worry about your target trailing off, even if your polar alignment isn't perfect.
Well, I'm saying when you said before, like when you were adjusting the phasing, let's call it, of the two prisms, you would adjust the phasing, recenter, adjust, recenter, adjust, recenter.
Yeah, I do that. I do that manually. Manually, I mean, with the controller.
Right, but I mean, could you use the auto guider to keep everything?
Yeah, you could use the on-screen commands for the mount, but don't expect the auto guiding feature to recenter for you. It's not going to do that, or at least it's going to be too slow in responding to what you're doing. Yeah. But you can use the on-screen controls to recenter the target, or you can use your hand controller or whatever you use.
Gotcha.
Just out of curiosity,
Yeah.
your the this device, the ADC, as you called it, what is the minimum aperture size with which you could actually use it?
I don't think there's a minimum aperture. I've seen it used with 6-inch, 8-inch telescopes, even 4-inch. I don't think there's a minimum.
Okay. All right.
5-inch max, 4-inch refractors. I don't think there's a problem if you have a smaller telescope. I think it benefits no matter what you use, and even with Mars now. I mean, for my location, Mars transits at 60 degrees, so that's really good. Even at 60 degrees, it's still helpful. It's touted as being something to use for low-lying planets, but yeah, it's been really helpful for that. But it's also been helpful for Mars, even though it's really high this time around.
Thank you.
So
Great work.
yeah,
No, great work. Great work.
I don't know if you guys want to, if you have any more questions, or I can show you some images.
Yeah, show us some images, and we could open up to questions for anybody want to ask any questions.
So this is my website, and I can show you some recent Mars images that I got. This is Friday night. We have Syrtis Major, we have the South Polar Cap, and some clouds. You can see some clouds over here. This is on October 9th. This was the last night where Mars was at its largest apparent size. And I got a nice view of Olympus Mons over here, some clouds over the Tharsis volcanoes over here.
Agapius, before you go to the next one, what's that blue stuff on the edges up and onto the left?
Those are clouds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cloud formations.
On Mars.
I'm not exactly sure on how the atmosphere works on Mars, but a lot of observers have been getting these bluish clouds, not just this apparition, but even on previous apparitions.
Yeah.
So have I during the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I think somebody referred to them as limb haze.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So
George, you'll have to try to name those clouds.
Yeah. Okay. Martian clouds.
So this apparition of Mars has been really good to me. I got a lot of data. I got a lot of chances to image, and this is probably my favorite data set on Mars from this apparition. This night was unbelievable. I was sitting outside, and the sky there were a few clouds going by, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna stay out and image, but boy, am I glad I did. This was a 3-hour data set. I got about 600 gigabytes of data on Mars, and if I show you the stacks, in fact, I'm going to show you. If I show you the stacks, it was 3 hours of continuously good seeing. Let me see. So, see that? So there's about 150 of them, and they're all really good quality. This was a night unlike anything I've seen. I had really good conditions for a long time. And I hope I get more of these soon, more of these nights.
Nice.
Yeah. So another really cool thing that I like to do is I love doing animations. And when you use a color camera and you shoot with this method of continuous files with the same settings and without changing your orientation, these are really easy to do. And it just adds to the dynamics of the planets when you can see them like that. So this is about 3 hours worth of images. This animation I think is about 170 continuous frames overlaid on top of each other, and you can see the slow rotation of the planet. And of course, with a planet like Jupiter, you can show so much more than just a static view. You can show the dynamics of the satellites. You can show different parts of the planet. It just adds to the observing experience, and it's really easy to do with a color camera. In fact, that's why I prefer using a color camera, because of these animations.
These animations are just beautiful. I've seen quicker animations, but there's something about the subtlety of this that's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Frank would love it.
Let me show you Jupiter. So these are, let me see, where do I have an animation? So I've shown this again. There we are. So this was back in 2016. I got a double shadow, double moon transit on Jupiter. So let's just give this some time to load. And the things that you can see here happening are incredible. You can see the change in separation between the satellites. You can see the change in the relative position of the shadow compared with the clouds on Jupiter. There's just so many things going on. And I think this was 4 hours or something of continuous files again. And it gives you a different perspective on the dynamics of the planets when you play with animations like that. Yeah.
And you said you're on the south shore of Cyprus?
I'm in the middle.
Oh, by like what? Nicosia?
Just south of Nicosia, about 20 minutes. So I'm between the two main mountain ranges on the island. And when conditions are good, they're often really good here. It doesn't happen all of the time, but when it does, it can be really good.
Nice.
Is that where you do most of your imaging?
99% of it. I don't travel for imaging. I've done it a few times, but when you have an optimized system and a method and a way of doing things, I'm not too keen on moving around, carrying stuff here and there. It's not going to give me anything more than what I can get from home.
Are these animations on the website?
Yep. You can go on and check them out. There's years of pictures of Jupiter here and Saturn, and Mars. That's most of my work is on the planets. I've only done a little bit of deep sky and a lot of eclipses, partial solar, lunar eclipses, stuff like that, but mostly the planets. So feel free to browse around, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have either now or later on. Just send me an email or something, and I'll be glad to chat and help.
Interesting perspective.
These are absolutely stunning.
Thank you.
So, Agapius, you just opened my eyes. I've been thinking, why would people do Planetary almost exclusively? And because there are just so many planets, not too many, and but you really opened up my eyes to that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the animations just blew my mind.
I get this question a lot, and especially from local amateurs. Because I post things online and on Facebook and stuff like that, and they're always saying, "Oh, Jupiter again, oh, Mars again, oh, Saturn again." But you know what? When you get to know the planets, they're never the same. Night after night, there's something else going on, and when you account for, especially on Jupiter, when you account for the moons, there's things change by the minute. And there's just so many things to observe on the planets. There's cloud structures and mutual phenomena with the satellites and the shadows, and there's storms happening. There's all kinds of things, and I never get bored.
Plus, this is our solar system, so these are our neighbors in our solar system, and these are objects that are relatively close to us.
And they're right there, and you can see them.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you try to do more distant ones, like I guess, I don't know, not quite Pluto, but Uranus, whatever?
Yeah, I've tried Uranus. This is a recent attempt. Uranus is really, really difficult. In what sense? It's tiny, it's very dim, and you need to capture a lot of data to push out even a hint of detail. And you need to be really careful that what you're getting is detail and not a processing artifact. So for this attempt, this was an hour's worth of data at an excruciatingly slow 10 frames per second. You can see, Uranus is what, 4 arc seconds across, maybe less. And you can still see the main cloud band showing up. I've tried Neptune as well. I don't think I have anything here on Neptune. But Uranus is rewarding, especially if you have a larger telescope. And of course, you have to use an infrared filter. I use a 610 nanometer with the color camera. And there's more stuff there as well. I've also done Venus. I can show you a result here. So this is Venus false colored with UV and IR. And what I did here is I used a number 47 blue stacked on top of a BG39 filter from Thor Labs to create sort of a poor man's Venus UV filter. And I took images with that and with a 642 nanometer infrared filter and layered them on top of each other to get this false colored view where you can see just some cloud bands on Venus. Another really rewarding target, and one that I really ought to spend more time with, is Venus. Again, there's so many things going on the planet. They're so
You can
dynamic.
see the phosphine.
Yeah. Well, I wish we could.
If it's there.
Yeah, I wish we could.
So, Agapius, a quick
Yeah.
question. On the Jupiter images,
Yeah.
I see, I saw like you had details showing up on the moons. Do you
Yes, sir.
process them separately, or or how do you get that?
So when you have, let's say, Ganymede close to Jupiter, when your telescope is collimated, it's really easy to see surface detail on Ganymede. I mean, this is a 9.25-inch telescope, and it shows up right away. When I process, what I do is I usually, because I use derotation, I usually process the moons differently to the planet, but I compose my shot so that the moon is where it was during the mid time of the capture for the planet, so that it's a realistic view. It's not something that's over processed, but detail shows up right away, even in the live feed, assuming you're focused and collimated.
Okay. Yeah, it's really hard to get
In fact, I have
on the moon.
I don't know if you can see it here. So this is a small sample. I don't know if we can see it. So here we have Jupiter, and you have Ganymede and the shadow of Europa, and yeah, it doesn't show up. Okay. Somewhere I have another. Here we are. So this is Jupiter with Ganymede and Callisto, and Callisto is really striking. To a really dark moon, but you can still push out some surface details from it. So this is a view from 2018. Let's just load this up. You can see the great red spot is on the limb here, about to rotate into view, and we have Ganymede here and Callisto here. And on Ganymede, you'll notice that you can even pick up the bright crater on the moon, and that's just incredible to see, even on the live feed.
That's beautiful.
So does anybody have any questions?
I have one question to go way back. You said that you need 5 times the pixel size, and the answer for 5 times the pixel size is the focal ratio of the telescope?
Yeah, that's where you want your system to be, to get the best sampling. But as I said, it's not strict. You can be a bit further than that. I mean, for my telescope, I should have been, if I followed that rule, I should have been about f18, f19, but I'm shooting at f22 and I'm fine with it. That's assuming you have absolutely perfect conditions. So feel free to experiment with that.
That's great information. I have an 8-inch, not an 8-inch refractor, I'm sorry, an f8 refractor. So with a 2 times Barlow, that'll take me to f16, which will be a lot better than what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Agapios, this is really great. Thanks very much for this presentation and hanging out so late at night.
Thank you.
We know
Thank
it's late
you,
at your
guys.
place.
Yeah, it's not so bad. It's almost 1 in the morning.
I guess you're used to staying up late, though.
Yeah.
Well, when you're doing planetary, you know, I really prefer early on in the apparitions when the planets are in the morning sky. So I'm used to getting up at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. and taking it from there. But as I get older, it's starting to take its toll. But yeah.
Yeah, but that's when the seeing is the best.
Yeah, and it's nice to be out at that time. It's quiet. Everybody's asleep. It's just you and the telescope and the planets, and it's nice.
Sounds great. Would you be able to share the PowerPoint presentation with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I can
Okay.
upload it somewhere and send you a link.
Yeah, maybe if to a Google Drive or something like that.
Yeah.
Thanks. That'd be great.
Thank you so much for having me, Samir and Stan and everybody. It's been a real pleasure. If anybody has any questions at any time, feel free. You can get my email from Stan or Samir and just reach out.